More and more people are joining, so thank you all. Just so you all are aware, this is our second community budget meeting. It is hosted by our finance department. You will hear from myself, LaShonda White, as well as Emil Camelo and Antonio Benuelos will be presenting today. We have a number of department heads and city staff on the call. So if there are questions after we present, you can feel free to ask, and one of our department heads should be here to help answer your questions. We do have interpretation in Spanish available. You should see a icon at the bottom of your screen if you want to be able to access that. And Antonio or Ms. Reina, if someone could say all of that in Spanish for me, that would be awesome.
Buenas tardes, habla Antonio Bañuelos, Departamento de Finanzas. Como dijo la señorita Lashonda, bienvenido para esta presentación. Aquí le vamos a presentar un estatus de los finanzas de la ciudad de Richmond. Sí tenemos servicio de interpretación si quiere escuchar la presentación en español. Hay un icono como de un globo en la parte de abajo de la pantalla de Zoom. Cliquea en eso y la presentación será en español. Okay. Al final tendremos una sesión de preguntas. Gracias.
All right. Also, I just want to let everyone know this is being recorded and it will be available, I assume tomorrow, on the city's website. So you can go to Finance Department's website and there'll be a link called Community Budget Meetings, and you can go there and find a number of resources and information, as well as the first community budget hearing and this one. So please go out and check that out. There's information in there about our budget as well as the American Rescue Plan. So please check out our website. All right. Is there anything else, Antonio or Emil, that I need to, or KCRT, that I need to share before we get started?
We're fine.
That's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And I just want to thank our amazing KCRT staff. They're behind the scenes, but they do amazing work, and we wouldn't be able to do all of this without them. So thank you to all of those who are helping us. All right, so I'm going to get started. And
can you see my screen?
I can't see the screen. We do have a Q&A. I just also want to state that there is also a Q&A function available here. So if people want to be able to send some questions via chat, we will answer them as we go along if possible. If not, you will be able to speak at the end of the meeting and ask the question verbally. All right, sorry. So yes, we can go to this PowerPoint. Okay, next slide, please. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to overview our budget, talk about some different highlights and challenges that we have, really dig into our revenues and expenses so you can see where we are for fiscal year, what our proposed budget is, where we stand for fiscal year 21-22, talk about next steps, and then open it up for questions and answers. Next slide. I know this is very small, but this just shows and gives you a glimpse of our organizational structure here in the city of Richmond. Of course, our Richmond residents are at the top. They elect our mayor and city council. And then we have our city managers. We have a city manager, city council form of government. The city manager is like the CEO of the organization, and the city council provides policy direction. And the city manager's job is mainly to implement that policy direction. And she does that with the help of many department heads and city staff. And we also have our city attorney's office and city clerk. And so we'll tell you a little bit more about the number of city staff that we have that really make this organization function. Next slide. So purpose of the budget. As I stated earlier, we're here to tell you about our budget, and we're really proud of the document that we present every year. It is we do an annual budget here in the city of Richmond, and it's a policy document. So with the help of city council, this document really sets the policy tone for the city of Richmond. It dictates where funding will be allocated to support the many needed services in our community. It's a financial plan. It guides us in terms of our operational needs, And it really communicates, and is intended to communicate our priorities, City Council's priorities and community priorities. Next slide. During the development of the current fiscal year budget, city staff, along with some of our council members, developed some goals. And, many of them still stand true right now. We want to have a structurally balanced budget. We want it where on an ongoing basis, our revenues either equal or exceed our expenditures. COVID impacted not just City of Richmond, but many cities. And so we want to continue to consider the impacts of COVID-19 on the services that we provide in our community, and make sure we really are tapping into and understanding what those needs are so that we can meet those needs. We want to evaluate our different service levels. So we want to look at the model of service delivery, the breadth of service, and the depth of the services that we're providing to make sure we meet the needs of our residents. And of course, we want to maintain our bond rating. So that is really important for us. It helps us have, it's like our credit. So we want to make sure the City of Richmond has really good credit. And part of that is, what they look at when they look at our credit rating is they look at how much money we have, in the bank, how much cash do we have? And so we want to make sure we have a policy level that helps us maintain that bond rating so we can continue to do the work we need to do. Next slide, please. So in terms of our process, what we do annually to bring eventually a balanced budget to City Council for their adoption by the end of, before July 1. So our budgets are developed annually, and we really work with all city departments. So the idea is that city departments are really connected to what community needs, whether there's external or internal customers. And they then develop and propose a budget for their department. So a lot of departments have many divisions, and they really are working in collaboration to bring forth proposals that will meet the needs of our community. There are lots of meetings and conversations internally to talk about those different budgets. So there's review and input and revisions that are made throughout the process, as I stated, internally. And then we also turn it outward. We go to City Council. We want to have community budget meetings like this one. We talk to our unions to see if there's input on what it is departments are proposing and what should be included in terms of service levels. And then finally, our City Council, we try and bring this to City Council numerous times. So we brought it to City Council for the first time on May 4th. They will continue to receive the budget and talk about it in order to make a final budget decisions regarding allocations for adoption before July 1 of 2021. Next slide. So this goes into a little more detail and gives you some dates. So during the month of February, so our departments are always thinking about their budgets, right? But in February is kind of when we officially kick off our budget season. And departments, as I stated, submit their revenue projections as well as their budget requests to finance. Finance compiles all of that and has department meetings with everyone to really ask questions and make sure that we're clear, there's clarity around the budget. And then they bring all that information in terms of revenue and expenditures all together. And that is initial kind of draft of where we stand in the month of April. May 4th, which was this past Tuesday, we took that draft, which was a status of expenditures, a snapshot, expenditures and revenues to the City Council on May 4th. And we're going to talk about what that showed a little later, but it did demonstrate that we have a little bit over a $12 million gap between revenue and expenditures. And it's just the beginning conversation to help get us to the point with City Council, with community, with staff, to how we get to a balanced budget. And we're going to continue to have those conversations through the end of June. Next slide. We have a process where our City Council provides feedback, and we have discussions, and we get policy direction from them. And here is a calendar of that. And as I stated, this PowerPoint presentation will be available online for people to look at. But we want to make sure Council has an opportunity to talk about the budget. They're also going to hear about the American Rescue Plan and different options for that funding. We're developing a fiscal sustainability plan so that, as I stated earlier, part of the goal is to have a structurally balanced budget. And so we want to have long-term fiscal sustainability here in the city. And so we have contracted with a company called Management Partners, and they have helped us, and we'll be presenting some options and updates on on the fiscal sustainability plan in June. And we'll continue to, have conversations about the budget until June 22nd. Next slide. In terms of community budget process, in terms of where community can have some input, we had our first meeting last month with the community, and we've had meetings where communities members can come during our council meetings. But today, we have another community budget meeting. We are meeting with our unions. They represent our hundreds of city employees, and we know that their input is really important, and we want to make sure we hear that. So we have provided opportunities for them to share input with us and for us to give information to our unions. And so that's what we're doing in both the months of May and June. Next slide. Part of our fiscal year 21-22 budget development process is really to also look at and get an update on where we are currently. So for 2021. And for those who may not be as familiar with the budget process, our budget year is July 1 through June 30th. So when we say our fiscal year, that's what we mean. We went to City Council in February of 2021 and gave them an update on where we are in the current fiscal year. And at that time, what we told them was that we had an operating surplus of $4.1 million. We were still hoping for some additional funding to come in or some union accommodations to be realized. That didn't happen. And so we want to make sure that it's clear now to our City Council, to the community, that as of right now, we are looking at a operating surplus of not 4.1 million, but $1.7 million. Next slide. Some things we are really proud of. So city staff works really hard. I just want to thank, Antonio, Belinda, the finance director, Delmy, our accounting manager, and finance department staff, Bert and Vernesia, who are our analysts who are holding it down, but all the rest of finance staff are just really doing a really wonderful job to help us be really proud of all the work that we're doing in finance, as well as the city of Richmond. So a few highlights. The last 10 years, we have required some financial restraints, and we have been able as staff to really meet that and have pulled back on some expenditures when we realized at the beginning of the fiscal year, there may be a deficit. We're hoping for increased revenues throughout the year, but we also are trying to, show some restraint in terms of how we expend funds if needed. And so because of that, we've avoided deficits for the last 5 fiscal years. We're really proud of that. We have also been able to, when we have some surplus at the end of the year, we've been able to pay down some of our negative cash balances. So we have some funds that aren't the general fund, which is the fund that pays for a lot of the services that are provided by the city. But we're able to, in some of those other funds, we're able to pay down some of those, we have negative cash, and we're able to pay those off, which really helps the city continue to be in good financial standing. We have been able to increase and maintain our credit ratings. So we're really proud of that and continuing to try and increase our reserve levels. And Tony, we're going to talk a little bit more about Measure U, but we're really proud of the work that has been done, not just by city staff, but in collaboration with outside stakeholders and some of our unions to get Measure U passed. And then finally, we have the American Rescue Plan, which is definitely going to help us in the next 2.5 years to address some of our budget needs. Next slide, please. The American Rescue Plan, many of you may know about this, but in case you don't, it is a $1.9 trillion infusion of resources into the United States. And so it hits various different sectors. Education is getting some funding, housing, transportation, but cities, local government are also getting funding. So cities and counties, City of Richmond's allocation right now is $20.1 million. And we're happy about that. We are going to receive it in 2 different installments. One will come later this fiscal year, and the next one will come a year later. We have to spend all of this funding no later than December 31st, 2024. And we want some information from all of you, maybe after when we finish this call, to see if people have some ideas about how we can spend this funding. We really want to hear from all of you. I'll be presenting that information on May 18th. But as staff, we'll have to be, once we decide on how we spend the money with the help of City Council, we will have to do some reporting, and we are still waiting for guidelines from Treasury before we know exactly how we can spend funds. Next slide. Here are some of the uses right now while we wait for Treasury to provide us information on how we can spend some of those ARPA funds. So I won't talk about all of them, but it really is to help deal with the impacts of COVID-19 on our revenues and expenditures. So we can use the funds, for example, for premium pay to essential employees, to restore some of our government services, and to make investments in infrastructure. What we cannot do is use it to fund our pensions. Next slide, please. Measure U. This was approved by voters after lots of work from, as I stated, city staff, as well as community-based organizations and unions to help get this placed on the ballot. It was approved by voters in November of 2020. And we recently went back to council, and our implementation date right now is January 1st, 2022. And this does change the way in which businesses will be taxed. And so instead of looking at current employees as the basis for that, the new methodology will be based on gross receipts from businesses. Next slide. We believe, based on our estimations, that it will bring in an additional $5.3 million in revenue, and our city staff, and Antonia is one of those city staff that is working on this along with our economic development team and many of our business community members and unions, is in terms of looking at definitions, interpretations that are included in the measure that was approved, how we implement this measure to make sure it is implemented in a way that really makes sense, and that we're implementing and developing policies and best practices. And after this, if you have any more questions about this, Antonio is the best person to answer those questions. All right, I think I am turning it over now to Mr. Benuelos. Thank you.
And on that note, let me dive a little bit into the numbers here. So what we presented to City Council this past Tuesday are the numbers that were submitted initially by the departments. So based on those submissions, the revenues total $182.9 million. That's 7.1 million more than our mid-year amounts, a 4% increase. Expenses, on the other hand, go up to 195.5. So it's a 23, almost $24 million increase, and close to 14%. This leads us to a current deficit of $12.6 million. Again, these are initial submissions by the departments. The major changes from the mid-year fiscal year 2021 to the current draft of the budget for 21-22. Let me talk a little bit about that. On the left-hand side, you see the revenues for the general fund. Property taxes, we see an increase of $2.4 million. That's primarily based on assessed valuation. Even though most people will see a modest increase of 1% based on the Prop 13 formula and the state CPI increase, property tax is going up higher than that because many very large properties sold in Richmond this past year. So we had an unusually situation where many properties, we're talking properties selling for over $100 million. That doesn't necessarily happen every year. We had more than one case happen this year. So that's good for the city of Richmond revenues. Sales tax, we see an increase of 4.3 million. When COVID first started, sales tax was the revenue stream that most people feared, most economists feared would be most hit by the city of Richmond. In some cities, it has hit significantly, especially cities that are based on tourism. Richmond isn't based on tourism. So although it did go down, it did not go down as much as we feared. The city of Richmond is bolstered, the sales tax component is bolstered by the three big box stores, which is Costco, Walmart, and Target. So they've been doing fairly well. They've probably gone down a little bit, but nothing significant this past year. And we foresee them to continue steady growth going forward. Utility user tax. This has many different components with it. Some of them, like telecommunications and cable, have been going down for the last 20 years. Others, like gas and electricity, have been slightly going up every year. So it's a fairly stagnant revenue stream. We're just expecting $500,000 in growth for next year. Other taxes, especially documentary transfer tax. That's the one I mentioned. Revenues come from this. Whenever a property sells in the city of Richmond, the city of Richmond gets a percentage of that sale. or we get there's a tax added onto the sale that's collected by the county for the city of Richmond. Voters in 2018, I believe, approved a new measure where the tax that is charged is actually tiered. So the higher the property value, the higher the tax that's collected by the county for the city of Richmond. Because of all the sales that we had and we have had in fiscal year 2021, the documentary transfer tax went up significant. Previous years, we usually get about $6 to $8 million. This year, we're probably going to get closer to $15 million. We can't necessarily expect that to happen next year. So although we might get $14, $15 million this year, next year, we're probably going to be closer to $8 million. So we're reducing the comparison there. And that's why you see a decrease in other taxes. For business license tax is actually a category that's included with other fees and charges, but the net increase is $6.1 million, and the vast majority of that is based on our estimates for Measure U, the business license tax proposal that was approved by the voters that gets implemented this coming fiscal year. So overall, we see an increase in revenues for the general fund of $7.1 million. That's a 4% increase. On the expenditure side, for personnel, we're seeing $19 million increase. That's a combination of salaries and benefits. So, and it's made up of several things: cost of living adjustment, just regular steps for employees, CalPERS going up for the city, and various other things along those lines. Professional service going up modestly of $200,000. Same thing with other expenses, 0.6. Cost pool is going up $2.8 million. The majority of that is a vehicle replacement. And finally, and the last major increase for the expenditures transferred out. This next fiscal year is the first year where the city is funding the Kids First initiative that was passed by the voters a few years back. So total increase for expenditures is 14% or close to $24 million. Now, how does the city generate revenue? Caught it from the previous slide. The majority of the revenue comes from the three big revenue stream, which is property taxes, sales tax, and UT. Those three together account for 77%. The other significant ones are going to be licenses, permits, and fees, which has the business license tax, and the other taxes, which has the documentary transfer tax. An operating transfer, which is also close to $10 million, that's actually a property tax that's collected a little bit separately, but some of that rolls over into the general fund. Here's a snapshot of all the different revenue categories that we have. Again, the top three are the top three lines. Those account for the vast majority. If you look at the line number 4, other taxes, that's where you see a decrease of $5.6 million. And that's the category that includes the documentary transfer tax. Overall increase of $7.4 million. Let me go a little bit into a detail on the different taxes that you guys pay. So property tax, you get it through your property tax bill. The main part of the 1% of the valuation of the property. Not all of that comes to the city of Richmond. Most of that, nearly half, goes to educational institutions, to the school district, to the community colleges. Contra Costa gets about 14% and then 9% for other. We get 28.5% of the 1% that you pay. For sales tax distribution, similar thing. So we all pay 9.75% for anything we buy online or we buy in Richmond. Of that, we get about 2%. 1% was called the Bradley Burned, which is the technical term for something that was approved by the state a long time ago. So we get that 1%. Every city gets that 1%. Anything above 7.25% base has to be approved by the local voters. And Richmond, for the city of Richmond, has approved 2 local ballots. In 2005, they approved what's called Measure U, and about 6 years ago, they approved Measure Q. So those two add up to another 1% for the city of Richmond. So the 9.75%, 2% comes directly to the city of Richmond. Utility user tax breakdown. So for all the utilities that we pay, there's a different rate. Currently for telecommunications, it's 9.5%. This includes your cell phone, your landline, anything along those lines. For cables, there's the video UUT of 5%. And on your PG&E or MCE bill, you'll see a 10% charge for the gas. There's also what's called a cap provision. If any business in Richmond does not want to provide actual data, they have the option to pay the cap provision. And currently it's close to $24 million this year, but it goes up or down every year based on a CPI inflator. And there's also a tax settlement with Chevron, currently paying $4 million per year, and that's set to expire in a couple of years. So they'll have to pay the full amount off. On the other side, how do we spend our revenue? The vast majority, 76% goes to salaries, wages, and benefits. The next larger item is going to be a cost pool, which is how we pay for certain things, cars and other services that are spread out throughout the city. And professional admin, that can be legal services, that can be contracts with other companies to do certain service for the city of Richmond. And finally, operating transfers out. That's where funds from the general fund go to other funds to help them out in certain ways. It can be employment and training. It's going to be kids first. It's going to be those sort of things, those sort of transfers to help certain programs. And that's currently at $7.4 million this year. Again, this is a snapshot of all the expenditures. The headline on top is wrong. This should be the fiscal year 21-22, and we're going to be at 100. We're currently at $195.5 million. These numbers are still being analyzed to see how accurate they are, if we can move them up or down, or what's the best thing to do. Again, the main items is going to be the salaries, wages, and benefits, the two top lines. And this is the other way of looking how we spend the money that we do get. 58% goes to public safety, which is police and fire. And the next 15% goes to public works, 7% for culture and recreation, and general government gets 20%. That's city manager, that's finance, that's KCRT and IT, human resources, for example. Overall, the city's budget is not general fund. That's the fund we use for most services that most people receive. But overall, we have several other funds, and they total to $366 million. This includes housing department and capital improvement debt service, along those lines. And staffing levels. Bottom line here, back in 11, 12, 10 years back, we had over 800 full-time employees. Now, fiscal year 2021, we're down to 679 employees. So that's many factors go into this, but that's a significant decrease over 10 years.
Okay, I think that's my turn. Well, what does this all mean? So we have, my name is Anil Kumela, by the way. I'm the Human Resources Director. I want to share this responsibility of sharing this information with you. You've heard about the current fiscal condition as we prepare for the next year's budget. So here's some positive and negative issues that are being raised. Again, we are not putting a value judgment at this stage. These are just issues that are upcoming that we have to deal with. One is the potential positive, right? We're going to get potentially $21 million that we need to spend between now and December 2024. Then there's the ongoing housing authority debt. This has been a challenge for many years and will probably will take a few years to address. And that means it causes an ongoing drag on the budget each year. The reimagining police public safety task force recommendations are coming up. They will be discussed by the council and of course will have an impact on the budget. The recommendations at this point are that it will be budget neutral as it relates to the entire total budget. But at this point, we don't know. So we just put it on the list. Then there's the ongoing negative fund balances. This has been a challenge for many years. Over the last 5 years, finance staff has done a really good job of getting a handle on that. We need to address the long-term deficits in each of these other funds in order to have a balanced budget in all the funds that we currently have. We have seen a slight uptick in our litigation and risk management budget. Needless to say, we need to be monitoring that carefully and reducing the potential liability in the future. Over the last 10, 15 years now, the capital maintenance priorities have been under prioritized, I guess is the best way to say it. We certainly need more infusion of funds to take care of our capital budget needs. Can move it to the next slide. Thank you. So what are our long-term and certainly ongoing challenges? For one thing, COVID continues to be a challenge. As I understand it, over the last 2 years, we've had an impact of about $15 million. There probably will be some opportunity to address some of those, recoup some of those costs based on the ARPA monies. On the other hand, pension costs have been rising and will continue to rise given the losses that have been suffered and are still coming due, plus the actual adjustments that have been made at the CalPERS system-wide basis. We, as I just mentioned, have underfunded our deferred maintenance or our maintenance for the city, and those deferred maintenance cannot be continued. So we will need to begin our investments in maintenance of the city's assets. Our reserve policy, ideally based on general accounting practices and recommended best practices, is at 2 months or 17%. We are finally hitting the target of 15%, which is great compared to where we were a few years ago, about 7%. So, but that needs to be, we need to monitor that as well. And as I mentioned earlier, our continued negative fund balances are a drag on our budgets and continue to need attention. Next. So one of the things that we learned from a few weeks ago from the management partners study is, remember, management partners were hired by the city to help us create a strategy on how to avoid repeating the annual struggles that we have. I mean, for the last 10 or more years now, every single year we have budget deficit. And that has had a detrimental impact on the city's budgets, on our relationships with each other, and the city's inability, therefore, to plan and address long-term needs. Based on that projection, we saw a $145 million deficit projected for 2031, just 10 years from now. But that was based on a 6% rate of return assumption. We thanks to the Lisa and Sean and others pointing that out, that was a very conservative number. I took the liberty to play with a different number, to use a 7% number, which is what was recommended by our union partners. And even with that number, you can see that in 2031, there's still a deficit of $85 million. The point is, no matter how you look at it, we have a huge deficit on an ongoing basis in the future. Next slide, please. So, as this slide shows, those deficits continue, and as long as we do not address them, we are destined to have these challenges every single year of deficits that we need to address by tightening our belt and not giving raises and so on. And so clearly it's time that we address it. The question is, how can we partner together to address those challenges? But as you can see from this graph, if we, based on the projections, based on the assumptions, in 2024, we are looking at a $5.3 million deficit. Now, if you notice on the next year, 2025, it shows a projected deficit of $8 million. That doesn't mean that's a new $8 million deficit, which means that if you don't address the deficit in 24, it becomes $13 million in 25, and so on. Next slide, please. So on an ongoing basis, one of the, again, there's a plus and minuses. There are several things coming out that we may want to focus on. One is the employee class and comp study. Since I'm leading that effort in human resources, I'm actually excited about it because we will finally know, we can finally do two things. One is restructure our classification system to make it, modernize it and make it relevant for today, and look at our structure of our reporting relationships and so on. But the other aspect is we'll finally know where exactly we stand, or where employees stand relative to the market. My guess is that it'll show that Richmond's employees are underpaid compared to the market. And this is important because it has an impact on our ability to retain talent and our ability to recruit highly talented folks. As I've made the point previously, we need to address our facilities maintenance, and the lack of investment in the past is coming to roost, and we have to therefore pay attention to it. We need to certainly modernize and set aside monies to replace our fleet and equipment. Again, that also in the long run reduces our costs. We need to build back and replenish our funds in order to pay for OPEB, which is other post-employment benefits, primarily medical benefits. So we need to put monies aside simply because we want to. The city needs to honor its commitment to its employees and the past benefits that employees have earned. Our reserves are certainly below ideal levels, which is 17%, but they're close. And so that's a positive note. I should also point out in my earlier slides, when I was talking about the annual deficits, we also have an opportunity, though I should have hastened to mention earlier, and that is with ARPA monies and with the continuing positive outlook of the economy, there may be an opportunity for us to work together and find long-term solutions. The fact is that we need to avoid these ongoing annual crises that are endemic to our condition. We believe that there is a structural deficit and it needs concerted efforts and partnership to address them. One of those problems is using our practice has been to use one-time monies for ongoing expenditures. And that just compounds the issue without dealing with the root causes of our financial difficulties. Next, please. So addressing these for the next fiscal year, what do we do? One of the things is we need to analyze, well, these are things we will be taking action on, and that is we will analyze our revenues and expenditures carefully. We'll work with our department heads and make sure that our current and long-term fiscal years are stable. We will evaluate our department requests carefully and provide recommendations on a balanced budget on June 23rd. We will also, as staff, collaborate with our partners in the union to engage in conversations which have frankly already begun on how do we deal with the long-term fiscal challenges. And I've said, we do have a long-term challenge, long-term problem, but we also have opportunities to deal with them. And so I think this is where we can find common ground. And finally, one of those opportunities, as I said, is to leverage our ARPA monies to buy some time and set the course on a path to fiscal sustainability. With that, if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer, or more likely have Lashanda and Antonio answer.
Okay, let's go with the raised hands first. Lisa Johnson, you should be unmuted. I think you're muted yourself. You need to unmute.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes.
I got a phone call. I apologize for that. Okay, I have a few questions. So I don't know if you have a ton of questions pending. So, I wasn't able to make the council meeting last week. Unfortunately, I was hiking, but so I noticed on the numbers you presented, we have approximately $16 million differential for the coming budget. So what is driving that expenditure differential? Is the biggest percentage of that pension and OPEB costs, or what is it when we have a $23 million increase in expenses versus $7 million in revenue? So the question on the documentary transfer tax I have that is going to offset us, we had so much for the last fiscal year, was a large part of that. Did the Ford Motor Plant actually sell for $110 million? The third question I have is really regarding Measure U. And I'm curious how much you guys said or predicted is going into the revenue for fiscal year 21-22. If I remember correctly, you guys were offsetting the start of that from July to January. If I have that correct, I may not. So please correct me if I'm not correct on that. But my concern is how you were estimating those numbers, given that there hasn't really been as much assessment done on that yet. And 50% of the revenue that was predicted and citizens were told before this went to the county for the ballot was coming from rental units. And that is not what voters voted on. There was illegal language included in that ballot measure, and we're not going to have that revenue. So I'm curious how much we were predicting from that, especially given that Berkeley's floor, well, they have a flat tax, is our floor. So we now have the largest tax rate of anybody, and businesses are going to get hammered by this. So I would love it if you could explain for the community how you're predicting the revenue from Measure U for the next fiscal year. Then lastly, I'm really, really concerned that the city knows we have this impending cliff. We know the largest elephant in the room is our unfunded liabilities for pensions and OPEB. And I don't know if it's over 600 million now. So when is the city, what is the plan for when we're going to finally address that elephant? We can't just keep increasing salaries and having no impact on pensions. The residents have expressed their concerns about this over and over and over, yet the unions and their demands are what gets prioritized, and our requests don't, and our services just keep getting diminished. So we need to understand this and when that's going to finally be taken into account, because I just heard them say that when they do this compensation study, they're going to find we're consistently underpaid and we're not going to be able to retain employees. We can't even afford the ones that we have. So there's a problem. And then lastly, it's the stimulus money. It's one-time money, the 20.81 million. What is the finance department recommending to the city council for how this will be used? And then the very last question, I'm sorry, is this reimagining the public safety task force is huge. There are many members of this community who are completely unaware of what is going on. This meeting is next Monday at 6:30 p.m. It's a special city council meeting. The largest number of participants that were at any of the task force meetings was a little over 90, 21 of which were task force members. People who aren't in agreement with what they're proposing are not being heard. That's what they feel, or they're afraid to speak up. And I don't know if the city, if we lose 32 to 33 sworn officers, people are going to be really upset, a large majority of them. And so I don't know what the city is planning to do to send out a mailer to the community at large to make them aware of what's happening so that they have a chance to speak up. There needs to be some type of a poll, something, a survey where they feel that they have a voice and they can do it in confidence, because many people are afraid to speak up. And this is going to be a huge thing if we lose 32 to 33 sworn officers and can't retrain them for a year. So I feel, a great sense of concern in the community. People are talking to me about it, and I am encouraging them to call in on Monday, but there are many that just do not feel comfortable speaking up. So I know I gave you a lot of questions. So thank you for your time, and thank you for meeting with the community. I really appreciate that you guys are doing that this year, and I totally support it. Thank you.
Let me take a couple of them. First, the transfer tax. I don't think the Ford building has sold, at least it's not on my radar as being one of the large sales. Most of the large sales have been large warehouses, and the sale of Hilltop, that hasn't hit our books yet. So the ones I've seen are mostly really large warehouses on the transfer tax. Maybe it did sell, I just didn't capture that one, but I haven't seen the Ford building. So if it either it's going to sell, that might be additional money for the city, or if it did sell, it wasn't as large as some of the other ones. In reference to Measure U, the forecast was considered a conservative forecast, was based on sales tax data for the most part. So that doesn't capture all the gross receipts for all cities. We'll post an RFP for assistance with implementation. Part of the assistance is to review the forecast, to see how accurate they are, to see how the numbers really pan out with more databases to pull information from, not just the sales tax. So that's something we're working on, and we'll come back to City Council in a few weeks, hopefully. I think Lisa also had questions about the stimulus and the reimagining. I'm not sure if Anil or Roshanda have responses for that.
I can answer the one really quickly about the American Rescue Plan funding. So what we're doing right now is, as I said, we're still waiting for regulations, rules from Treasury. But in the meantime, we are taking recommendations, suggestions, ideas from residents and other stakeholders about how we could spend the funding in within the parameters that have been provided to us so far. And so I'm definitely open to that information. I am right now in charge of collecting that information. So if you go on our website, there's a way for individuals to fill out this little survey to give recommendations for that. But on the 18th of May, the stage we're at is just to provide to City Council a list of ideas from the community. And then we will move from there in terms of getting some policy direction from City Council and combining that with what we see as city staff in terms of how the funds could also be used. And while I'm talking about that, there was a question in the chat about the American Rescue Plan funds and will it be used to offset projected expenditures in the budget, and will that in turn reduce the projected deficit? If we decide to use it in that manner and if it's allowable, then yes, it could possibly reduce the projected deficit. So I hope that answers your question, Mr. Varga. And there were questions about OPEB, Neil, if you wanted to answer that one.
You're muted.
Sorry about that. Yes. So on the OPEB, let me find the question. I apologize. I was responding to another question, so I didn't catch the OPEB question. I see the pension question. There's a question about can we move to another retirement plan? So that yes, ultimately it has to be negotiated with the unions, but yes, it can be done. The challenge is that our debt, the unfunded portion of our CalPERS liability doesn't go away. In other words, the challenge today is not that we are not paying our current expenditures, our current cost that we are accruing. Employees and investments are paying for our current expenses. The challenge is that we have accrued liability from the past, and that doesn't go away even if you change to a different model, retirement plan model. So hope that answers the question. I don't see the question on OPEB. If someone can tell me where it's at or ask me the orally, I'm happy to answer.
Lisa, if you don't mind, can you place your question, your specific question regarding OPEB for us in the chat or in the Q&A, and we will make sure we can answer your question. We apologize for missing that one. And then if I could just take another question from the chat, do you have plans to use ARPA funds to address food insecurity in Richmond? As I stated, we are taking recommendations or ideas about how to use that funding. We also are being very thoughtful, or need to be very thoughtful, because it's $1.9 trillion relief package, and there are other categories of funding that are available to address various things, such as maybe food insecurity or other issues that may come up for residents in terms of how we should spend the money. So we want to be strategic in how we can maybe support businesses or others, community-based organizations, how we as staff can go after funding from some of those other categories versus how we utilize our $20.1 million. So we will eventually come to a point where there's a more clear plan about the use of our city funds, but we don't want to lose sight of the fact that there are other pots of money out there, and we want to be very smart about how we do that.
I think one of Lisa's questions had to do with the reimagining the police or safety task force. And I think the question specifically had to do with whether there could be community forums to discuss that. We have already had community forums. The task force has had many meetings. If your question, Lisa, had to do with addressing the recommendations themselves, as you may know, the council is meeting on the recommendations on Monday. You can certainly present your thoughts to the city council then, and in subsequent city council meeting.
Antonio, do you want to take another call?
Sure, let me go. Okay,
Cordell Handler. I'll open his microphone.
So Antonio, I'm looking at the chat questions here while you're waiting.
Okay, I'm ready.
I'm sorry, go
Go ahead,
ahead.
Cordell.
Yes, LaShonda, thank you for that presentation. So I do want the record to reflect that I was the one that did the reorg chart. So it was my idea to get 2 deputy CMs. So that's one question. That's an accomplishment. So that's one. But the other questions I had was and I know this sounds a little silly, but has department heads put in requests, like to get some additional, positions, like needed to be filled. So if either Neil or someone else can answer that, that'd be very helpful. Oh,
Thank you, Cordell. Anil, do you have a response possibly to Cordell's? Question.
Cordell, could you rephrase the question? I didn't quite understand. I apologize.
hold on. So the question was, has department heads seeking to to fill some positions that have been vacant for quite some time?
Okay, so you're asking our department heads working to fill the positions that have been vacant for some time. If they are funded positions, my guess is that every department head wants to fill every single funded position they've had. I can tell you that in human resources, we want to assist our department heads to fill the positions. If they have been vacant for a long time, despite our efforts, it's probably because I know there are a couple of positions of those kinds that fall in the category. And it's usually because we just are having a hard time, given the city's compensation structure, to attract and fill certain difficult to fill positions. So I hope that answers your question. And actually, Jan had a question on when we hire new employees, will they be part of a new retirement plan and save the city more money? First, we don't have another retirement plan right now. Every single new employee that comes into the city is part of the current CalPERS agreement. And that's because if we want to move away from CalPERS, we would need to either sever our contract with CalPERS, and before we do that, negotiate such a separation with our unions. And that's not been done yet. We have not gotten direction to do so.
This is Antonio. Lisa in the question and answer section basically asked regarding the $16 million differential for the salaries and benefits. It's actually made up of several different things. In there, we have a cost of living adjustment of 2%. That's $2 million right there. There's a steps for current employees. If they're step 3, we're assuming they're going to go up a step. So all in all, for all employed in the city, that comes out to about $600,000. We adjusted overtime to match, what's realistic. And every year we cut overtime, we end up spending higher than what we cut it to. So that's another 2.2. Also restoring part-time help for different departments, including cultural services, library, and that totals to $600,000. And a couple of other adjustments and personal expenses, but those are the bulk ones. On the benefits side, that was just on the salaries and wages side. On the benefits side, the biggest one is PERS going up 5.7 million from our original estimate. This is our original estimate, an increase of 5.7. That's the biggest chunk. Okay, looks like Alicia has her.
Yes, thank you. My name is Alicia Gallo. I'm here tonight representing Richmond Main Street Initiative. I really appreciate, off the top, I just want to say I really appreciate the City of Richmond is hosting these community budget meetings. And I'm really happy to hear that the city is taking public feedback and recommendations on use of the ARPA funds. My recommendation that I'd like to offer during my time right now relates to economic development and supporting small businesses in the City of Richmond. I understand that many of the city staff and city council members recognize the importance of a strong Richmond-based economy, and that the data demonstrates that locally owned businesses play a huge role in the stability of neighborhoods and communities. They hire locals, they are growing at faster rates than larger corporations. They also give back more to the community. And so my recommendation would be for the city to consider looking at filling some of those vacant staffing roles within the economic development department to be able to support both existing businesses and the creation of new businesses, and also to consider creating grant programs to support the economic development and small business support community organizations that are working in Richmond and have been really crucial in supporting small businesses through the COVID-19 crisis. We're continuing to do that work. Although there are other funding resources available for nonprofits, I can report back that from personal experience, those are not always easily available, and so they're not as easily accessible or equitably distributed to the organizations who are doing a lot of the kind of boots on the ground hard work to really support equitable economic development in areas, especially those that really need it, like the city of Richmond. And I really feel like the city of Richmond could be a leader in helping to support a more collaborative approach to supporting small businesses. And so that's just the recommendation that I wanted to provide during this time. And I definitely look forward to submitting that recommendation, any other ideas that we might have through the city's online form, and also would be happy to have conversations with folks as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alicia. And I'm hoping everyone can see in the Q&A, I put the link to the website to be able to go and provide feedback on the page. It'll be this big blue bar you can click, and there's 2 questions. Do you have any thoughts or ideas, inputs around the fiscal year 21-22 budget in terms of funding, but also do you have recommendations around ARPA? And I'll put it also in the chat. Thank you.
And I think we're coming up in the 5 o'clock hour. I'll just respond to Lisa Johnson's question on OPEB and the general issue of budget. I'll just say that clearly the city needs to balance, we need to provide excellent services to the community, and that's continues to be our goal. I also will share with you that as was alluded to by the caller earlier, we are experiencing difficulty in hiring for certain positions, and that's because the Richmond's salaries are lagging from the marketplace, in our marketplace, and are not competitive. So we need to do both. We need to address the needs of the community, and we need to be able to attract talent so that we can provide high quality services to our residents.
Antonio, can you call I think there's one more hand up.
Hey, Jeff, you're muted. If you can unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I have one suggestion and one question, and maybe it's really a request that you added to your list of future planning, worries, concerns that really need to be on the table as kind of, I guess what you call worst case scenario planning, so that we're not surprised and we have our eyes wide open. So what that one is that I don't know about you, but I was looking for a 50-year cash flow analysis of the Point Melody project. And since the city's financial report that it commissioned from a couple of consulting firms didn't provide that, I did my own. And when I plugged in 1,452 housing units selling at, a 1.1 million or something average, I found out that there was no remote possibility of the property taxes and the sales tax from new residents in any way coming close to covering the costs of a 3-shift fire station. It just isn't even close. So I worked it out. To me, and I increased property taxes 2% a year, every year. I mean, I wasn't trying to make it look as bad as I could. I was trying to make it look as good as I could. And I came up with $150,000 over 40 years. I mean, I'm sorry, 150 million in deficits to the general fund over 40 years. So I think that you need to do this. You should do your own spreadsheets and count up all the revenues and count up all the expenses and see what you come up with. So that's my request for you to add something to the long-term risks that we face, along with the good list you had. Just one more item for it. My other comment is, and this is like what the last person said, I think it's very important for us to understand the things we need to do that we don't do now, that we have no chance to do because we don't have the staff, we don't have the bandwidth. We just can't, we can't do it now. I mean, a good example of that would be the helping small business. That was what the last person was talking about. Maybe we need 1 or 2 people in the mayor's office or the city manager's office to really help, small businesses be successful. But there are other things like increasing the summer youth program, more paid jobs, that kind of thing, which happens to be one of the recommendations coming out of the Reimagining Public Safety, thing, to spend a couple million more a year to provide 1,000 kids with summer jobs instead of just 200. I mean, I'm not saying that we can afford to do all of these things. I'm just saying that we need to be aware and keep a list of the things we wish we could do and that would really benefit the community, so that we've got a stone cold sober, look at not just kind of like, how do we make the current budget work, but also, the opportunity costs of where we spend our money. I mean, I'm not saying any of this is easy, but if you want to have a more community and a more interactive, meeting, what do you want to call it? A more interactive process with the community about budget issues, which is what these meetings I think are intended to provide, then, there's one slide kind of missing, because you were covering, most of the things people would need to know. Well, but this is another thing people need to know. Here are the things we wish we could do that are not currently in our budget. It's just a suggestion, because at the end of the day, the needs keep bubbling up, and there's a lot of frustration that we don't have some of the, maybe it's all, and that takes us to grant writing. It takes us to all sorts of things. But, if we need to be clear and make decisions about our priorities for the things that we don't do now, as much as for our priorities for how to manage what we do now, if I'm making myself clear.
Yes, thank you, Jeff, for your comments. And if people do have ideas or suggestions about what they think the city should be doing as part of the budget process, you can use that, go to that same link, click, and there's a question that you can answer about the budget process and also about the American Rescue Plan.
Okay, will do.
Thank you. So I know we are past time. I'm happy to stay on. If people need to leave, we understand and respect that. I don't know if it's okay, Anil, for us to take Jim Becker. He had a question in the chat, and he also had his hand up.
Certainly. Happy to do that.
Great, thank you, LaShonda. Can you hear me okay? I'm traveling, so I hope you can hear me.
Yes,
okay, great. I'm Jim Becker with the Richmond Community Foundation and RCF Connects. And I'm curious how either this budget or the city's financial planning process in general is looking into deferred maintenance, particularly related to its parks and community centers. I think, I think there's some strategies that we could work together on around that, but I'm curious how that plays into this budget.
Well, a couple of things. One is the fact is that the truth is that we haven't had a comprehensive deferred maintenance budget for many years, and we now have a new public works director who has been interested in doing so. It kind of is a chicken and egg in the sense that we need to have the resources to be able to address our long-term needs. He is going to be looking at that. If he's online, I would welcome Joe to comment on this issue if you want. He's got many challenges ahead of him. This is just one of them. But clearly, you should know that the city's leadership team is, in fact, very aware of the deferred maintenance challenge that we have had and wants to address it.
Thank you.
And I do see Joe's name here. I don't know if he.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Joe.
Okay, perfect timing. Yeah, it's Anil hit the nail on the head. That's one of the things that we're going to be looking for with this budget is an appropriation for an assessment study to really look at all of the city's facilities, not just vertical assets in occupied structures, but also infrastructure. And so as you can imagine, a study of that magnitude is cost intensive, but what it does is it provides a roadmap to how to implement and address the vast needs for maintenance, deferred maintenance for the various components of infrastructure.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Let me see. Well, there was one question that came in really early on. Is the city's budgeting process independently audited for adherence to generally accepted processes and/or best practices vis-a-vis budget setting? Antonio or Anil, in terms of, I know we do, our budget process isn't independently audited, but I know the city is audited every year.
Yeah, I think I answered. So sorry, Antonio, I'll let you answer that. But generally, yes, you're right. There's a difference. The budget process is not audited, but I probably misstated in the chat to Gilbert's question.
Okay.
The city's finances are audited, so the budget process is not, which is more of a standard process. Antonio, you want to correct me if I'm wrong?
That's correct. Additionally, we do submit our budget plan to a couple, for review with the California Society of Municipal Finance Officers and GFOA, Governmental Financial Officers, and it meets their guidelines in the process and what's included, what's not included, and how it's set up. I'm not sure if that's exactly what they're looking for, but that's another review that we do. But as far as I know, the audit isn't of the budget. I mean, they'll look at components of the budget to see, they'll ask why you budgeted a certain thing if it's off one year, for example. They want to look at our reasoning for looking forward to something that didn't happen or not anticipating something. That's something that they do review.
I'm looking through the chat.
Sorry,
Yeah, I was just saying I was looking through the chat to see if we had missed answering anyone's questions.
I think from the basic themes, all the major themes have been answered. So unless there's any burning question out there.
Something I want to know, I think somebody asked in the chat, will we get any Measure X money? I'm thinking we will, but I have no idea if it's, we have to lobby for it or if it's part of the county's plan to divvy it up a little bit to the cities. Anybody know?
What I do know about Measure X is that there's a committee that was formed where each of the Board of Supervisors was able to appoint a number, and then there were some at large. So they could appoint some from their area, and there was an at large number of participants or committee members. And that collectively, I think that body is going to make some decisions or make some recommendations around Measure X funding, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm not sure who Supervisor Joy is selected for that as part of, since he's our supervisor. But thank you for bringing that up. Do we want to, I leave it up to the group. Do we want to take the 2 more hands that are popping up? I don't hear a no, so John Varga.
He muted himself.
Thank you so much. I actually had a question in the Q&A that I just wanted to direct your attention to, and I won't bore you with repeating it. So you can find it there. Maybe answer the other person's question while reading that one. I appreciate it.
John, it was very specific, so I didn't want to take a stab at it. What we will do is, since we are always oftentimes in contact, I'm copying that down for myself, and we'll get staff to look at it and get back to you on the precise response.
Great, I appreciate that. Thank you.
So I just, yeah, thanks, LaShonda. I just wanted to respond to Measure X. So one of my staff members, Mariana Moore, who leads our Ensuring Opportunity effort, has actually been selected as the chair for Measure X. So the Measure X committee, so I will reach out to her and make sure that we keep the city apprised of the process.
Definitely appreciate that and that partnership. Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
Oh, hey, I have one quick question regarding overtime. Last year during the budget process, you guys showed a fascinating slide where you showed, I think, what you guys always cut budget down, the overtime budget down to. And every year it was consistently overspent by almost the exact same amount. Like it was like clockwork. It was a fantastic slide. So how are you guys going to address the overtime issue with this financial budget? Because even with fiscal year 2021, I think when you guys started giving the monthly updates as requested, we were already overspent on overtime within the first month by a significant percentage. So what is the magic answer there? Because we consistently cut it to come up with, quote, a structurally balanced budget. And it's a joke because it's consistently over every year by almost the same amount.
So departments looked at their budgets and they budgeted a more likely scenario. That's one of the increases in the salaries and wages that's one of the line items within salaries and wages, $2.2 million increase for overtime this year, 21-22.
All right,
so,
great.
Okay, I guess we'll say that's the last question. Well, thank you very much for participating in this question and answer session as well as our presentation. Happy to answer any other questions you may have. Don't forget our next meeting of the City Council is going to be on Monday, and specifically regarding as a special meeting on the reimagining task force recommendations.
And then if I could, on the next day, the next night, so stay tuned, come back again the next night, May 11th, are presentations from all of our departments, budget presentations, where you'll get to hear about services each department and division provides, accomplishments from the current year, as well as opportunities and challenges that they have. So please tune in for that one also. And do not forget to go to the website. It is off of our finance department's website, and you can get information on that website with regards to the fiscal year 21-22 budget process. And we look forward to any feedback and input you have. Thank you.